The opinions expressed on the radio program by the hosts, co-hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions and responsibility of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Genesis Radio, www.genesisradio.com, Genesis Radio's owners, management, or affiliates.
It's another Thoughtful Thursday, and you are on the air with Ron, and today, Miss Tish. Welcome back, Miss Tish.
Thank you.
And we have a guest with us today. Why don't you tell us about your guest?
Hi, Devin. Say hi.
Hi.
This is my nephew, everybody, and he's interested in what we do. So he's here today. Come swing around this way a little bit to hang out with us and get a little feel of what it is that we do here.
So today we have a bit of a youth movement, so we can get a little, I guess, some input from some younger people. But today's subject may be a little, advanced for young people, but we're gonna see what they think. Today we wanted to talk about a subject that for a lot of people of color is kind of taboo. It's a reality, but we just don't like to discuss it. And what I'm talking about is separation. I know in this country, we've always been separated on one level or another, socially, economically, politically, and of course, along, I don't want to say racial lines, but let's say lines of skin color, right? It's always been an issue. And now, down in Louisiana, there is a section of Baton Rouge that is breaking away from Baton Rouge to form an all-white community. The new town will be called St. George, which will be completely separate from Baton Rouge. And these people, wealthy people, affluent area, want to separate themselves from, I guess, the black and brown folks of Baton Rouge, and maybe some of the governmental issues that go on in Baton Rouge. But if it will work for them, would it work for us? Is that something that we should be considering? What do you think, Tish?
First of all, wow, that is heavy.
Yeah.
I think that if we had a stronger mindset of togetherness,
Mm-hmm.
I think not only could it work, but it could thrive to dangerous levels. Dangerous in the sense of we could literally be the new world order, and not in a bad way, in all the greatest ways.
Well, not only has this happened down in Louisiana, I guess about a year or so ago, there were about 19 black families that bought 96 acres of land in Georgia.
Yes, I remember that.
And basically, they're starting their own community. I guess their hope is to have something like the Black Wall Street, a
Right.
thriving community, economically thriving community, and to kind of separate themselves from all of the craziness that goes on in this country. A safe environment where we can feel safe, where we can be who we are, right? And in this country, for black and brown people, we've never been totally assimilated into the American system. No matter what we do, right? No matter what we do, there's always been a but. We fought in all of America's wars, but we weren't allowed to vote. We weren't allowed to build or buy a home in certain areas. We couldn't get loans for cars for businesses, even though we were some of the most loyal of American citizens.
Right.
So realistically, when you think of separation, the most important aspect of separation is the mental part of it.
Right, because we were never really included.
we weren't. And I think it was Dr. Francis Cress-Welsing who said the most dangerous form of colonization is colonization of your mind. When you think like a European, even though the European is not physically there anymore to control the economy of your community, your thoughts, your actions, we still do it even though there's no physical European presence. We now think like the European.
Right.
So I think that's the first step, recolonization of the African mind.
Mm-hmm.
But how many of us would be willing to do that? You know, that's a tough question.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because we have, I guess, and I was listening to urban radio, and they were talking about people who had served 25 years or something in jail, and how over that time you become institutionalized.
Absolutely.
Well, when you have a people under your control for 400 years, I guess they become institutionalized as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that for Black people, we have been suffering from Stockholm syndrome since we left the plantation. For those who aren't familiar with Stockholm syndrome, in Stockholm, in Europe, there were a group of people who were robbing a bank. And police came and there was a standoff. Well, the people inside the bank over a period of time began to sympathize with the robbers, right? They no longer saw them as a threat, as the criminals, but more as people who've been victimized. And for us in this country, and I'm talking about Black people, we have also suffered from Stockholm syndrome for a number of years. Since we left the plantation, we have had sympathy for those who in many instances will do us harm, physically, emotionally, psychologically, and definitely economically, right? We have not benefited from our labor in this country. And when people talk about, and I'm talking about now, you have the MAGA crowd saying we want our country back. I'm not quite sure who took it and where it went.
Right. That's my question.
But when did it become your country?
Well, Christopher Columbus discovered it.
Right.
Because when he had the conversation with the people that he met when he got off the boat.
Right.
And he told them he discovered it.
Right.
And yeah, because, there were people already there. But we're going to completely bypass that part.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, there's a Cadillac truck across the street. Hope you didn't leave your keys in the car because I plan to discover it when I leave the studio.
Yeah.
So apparently that's how it works in America.
Mm-hmm.
You can just go discover stuff because it's there and it belongs to you. Apparently, it's not how it works. But being that it wasn't discovered, who took it is an excellent question.
Mm-hmm.
But an even better question is, who'd you take it from?
Right. I think that for European men, I think that after the civil rights legislation was signed, and you have to keep in mind that all across the Deep South, prior to 1964, the Deep South was all Democratic, right? In fact, they called them the Dixiecrats, and these were the folks who would not sign any legislation to give Black folks the right to vote, human rights, period. They were like completely against it. Well, when Lyndon Johnson signed first the Civil Rights Act in 64, all of them jumped ship and became Republicans. Like, no way we're going to allow these folks to vote and to have rights that we have to respect. So they became Republicans. And now, excuse me, the Republican Party, at least a segment of it, is probably the most radical group that we've ever encountered in this country. And it could be that MAGA sentiment could be behind these people wanting to break away. And they're not the only ones. Years ago, Texas parts of Texas wanted to secede,
Yes.
as did California.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have a state that is doing well economically, but you're paying taxes to, I guess, try to, I guess, help those other localities that are not doing well, it drains the local economy. So a lot of states were like, the hell with this. We need to break away and form our own state or country so that we are self-sufficient. Instead of paying for the other 49 states, let's just worry about our locality. So in that, it might make sense from an economic standpoint, but for us who have been so heavily indoctrinated that we think like Europeans, it is it's a viable possibility. Of us are really too afraid to venture out beyond the confines of the plantation.
Right.
So if you think about it, most crime, and I'm just talking about it within the black and brown community, happens, it's pretty much centered in a black and brown community. So the stick up kids aren't going onto Park Avenue, right? Even though that's where the bulk of the money is, they're not going to venture out very far beyond the confines of that plantation, right?
Yep.
So they're going to stay there and commit their crimes. They're going to sell drugs in that area. Of course, from a business standpoint, you can make a lot more money selling on Park Avenue than you can, in Harlem.
Mm-hmm.
More money available uptown. But we have that plantation mentality where we stay within a certain area, within the confines. So for us to talk about separating and forming our own communities, and I got into a little argument with an on-air guy at Urban Radio. It was actually Clay Kane. I called into his show one day, and I said, Clay, I have a question for you. Because he's all about the vote, right? Changing things through the vote. And I said, Clay, did black people have more in terms of economics, land, and businesses prior to us having the right to vote, or do we have it now? So rather than answer the question, what he did was, he says, well, a vote, if you're not going to vote, you're going to talk about voting, right? The only choice is Joe Biden. That's not my point. My point is, prior to us having the right to vote, we had thriving communities. The Black Wall Street was destroyed in 1915. So for several years leading up to that time, it was a thriving community in Tulsa, Oklahoma. We didn't have the right to vote. Oh, we built communities, just like Rosewood and several others. After the right to vote, there also was the collapse of the black community, because now our money doesn't have to stay in the black community. Now we can go to Macy's, we can go to Bloomingdale's, Gimbel's, right? I mean, during that time, those legacy stores that were around, we can go shop there. So our businesses, of course, collapsed. I can remember in the 70s when growing up in New York, you would see the fires from the Bronx, where the Bronx was burning night after night. I can remember the blackout in 77 where, Broadway, a section of Brooklyn, Broadway, went up in flames. People looted the stores and then set them on fire. For the business owners, wasn't that bad. They were insured. They got the money and they said, well, we're not going to reinvest in this area. We're going to go to where the money is. And for years, that neighborhood was economically depressed. Because not only did you burn the businesses, people who worked there didn't have jobs anymore. No jobs, no buying homes, no buying cars, no buying durable goods. Yep. So, we've always been separated on one level or another. But I think one of the problems is, well, I should say, I know one of the problems is that our thinking is so Eurocentric that we choose leaders who will tell us, no, 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 that's the wrong thing to do. No, no, no. We need to get out there and vote. Okay. So, this upcoming election, we have a choice of two Caucasian men. One that is supporting a genocide that is slaughtering innocent people in which is Palestine.
Right.
They call it Israel, but it's Palestine. So far, about over 30,000 people, mostly women and children, have been slaughtered.
Right.
And he's going to continue to support that military effort. The other choice is a guy that says, well, I want to be a dictator on day one. Well, what happens on day two? Who has complete power on day one and then on day two says, you know what? This isn't all it's cracked up to be. I'm going to give some of the power back.
Oh, day two, we start pushing boundaries.
Of course. He's already pushing boundaries because, let's be realistic, if you're following his trial, the judge has fined him, I think, $9,000 already, and has warned him and his legal team repeatedly about making threats against witnesses, the judge's family. Who does that?
The judge's family.
His daughter. He threatened the judge's daughter, right? So
Sweet Jesus.
any
In
other
court.
outside, well, every day he leaves the court and goes outside, just outside the door of the court, and has a little press conference. So,
I'm not surprised.
well, what other defendant is going to be allowed, given that much leeway, to make threats repeatedly
None.
and be warned repeatedly, and then you find this guy $9,000 to a guy that was able to put up a $175 million bond.
Well, you know what? I have to say this. And I'm being as sarcastic as I possibly can be. That is the only man of color, although that color is orange, I have ever seen get away with threatening a judge's daughter and go home to his own bed that night.
Right.
Because what in all the hell, excuse me, what?
Yeah.
What?
But these are the choices that we have in this upcoming election. And despite the clear flaws that these two guys have, we're told we need to get out and support the Biden administration. Black people are some of the most loyal Democratic voters, right? Now, Devin, how old are you?
15.
Okay. So you can't register to vote for another 3 years. So when you are ready to vote, what party do you think you affiliate with? Excuse me. Never gave it any thought?
No.
Well, for young people who are protesting, you're familiar with the protest, right?
Yes.
What do you think about that?
Honestly, not sure what to say on that. I'm not too sure.
Are you nervous?
Well, do you think they have a right to protest?
I think so. I guess.
Okay.
He's nervous.
Well, I'll tell you something, right? I think something that is overlooked in these protests. So these people are, college age. We're talking 18 up, right? And a lot of people are saying the protests need to stop. They're saying, well, the protests are getting out of hand. But the average age of a soldier in Vietnam was 19. Or the average age of a combat soldier in Vietnam, 19 years of age. So now, and that's just a few years older than you. So now these people that are protesting around that age, 19, 20, 21, right? For the last several quarters, the military has not been able to have to acquire enough recruits. Most people, at least men my age, had to register for selective service.
Right.
So a lot of these people that are protesting today, whose family are not affluent, who have to get financial aid, you have to have signed up for the draft.
Mm-hmm.
If the government or the armed forces are not meeting their quotas, and this situation in the Gulf heats up, because Israel has bombed in Lebanon, they bombed in Syria. So if this war widens, where does America find the troops to send over there?
They're probably going to try to reinstate the draft.
Will they have a
Or-
choice?
Will they have a choice? No, because people have smartened up and they realize, I mean, first of all, look at the people who have actually volunteered for whatever reason.
Mhm.
People who have volunteered to join the military have gone to other countries, have done whatever this country has made them do, have come back drastically mentally destroyed,
Mhm.
and have been treated like less than nothing. They get no respect.
Mm.
Yeah, sure. Strangers on the street see their uniform, they might see their stars, they see them, and we thank them. Thank you for your service. And that's the most they get. They're homeless, they're hungry, their families, they're mentally out of their mind because of the things that they have seen and done, because they swore an oath to this country, who, in my opinion, let me say this again, who, in my opinion,
Mhm.
is the biggest T word there is. We all know what that T
Now,
word is.
you know, I got something to say about that, right?
Well, go ahead.
Okay, so I served my time in the military. One, I didn't go in because I was red, white, and blue, or I was patriotic. I went in because I had a family to feed.
Right.
So that
And
was,
thank you for your
and
service.
that's why I went into service. Everybody goes in for whatever they're going for.
And that's why I said,
But you're
no
right.
matter
When
what your
a lot of
reason
the
is.
soldiers, when they do come home, and I'm not going to say all of them because I don't want to be inclusive, but a lot of soldiers, when they do come home, they're not treated exactly the way that they should,
Right.
especially African Americans when it comes time to get
Right.
benefits. I can also tell you, if you didn't serve in the Vietnam era, it's going to be even more difficult for you to get benefits.
Mhm.
And a lot of the soldiers that did serve in the Vietnam era, and just right after the Vietnam era, a lot of the records were lost. Not so much lost, but there was a fire in the Pentagon, and a lot of the records were burnt up. So it makes it even more difficult for you to get benefits because you have to be able to prove it. No records, no proof.
Right.
Now, for me, I joined the Army because I wanted to go to college. And, when I was about 20 years old, we're talking the mid 80s, the Army was asking, or the government at the time was offering $50,000 to go to college for 2 years of service. It was something I never considered. I wasn't especially patriotic,
Right.
but I knew that my parents had just paid for my sister 4 years of college. I didn't want to ask them to, take out more loans for me. So I said, you know what, 2 years, what the hell?
Right.
So
Doesn't seem like a lot when you're at that age.
it doesn't. I was 20 when I was on the delayed entry program. So I went in, I was 21, which is old by Army standards, because most of these guys come around high school 17, 18 years of age, right? So, when I went in, I had a focus. I didn't want to be in the infantry. I didn't want to shoot anybody, so I became a medic.
Okay.
I said, I'll help people, right?
Mhm.
My focus was not to kill. And I just wanted the money to go to college. But you find a lot of these kids who are protesting need that money to continue education. And for us to say the protests need to stop, keep in mind that these are the people that may find themselves on the front line in some desert somewhere, dying for something they really do not understand. Just like my uncle was in Vietnam twice and tried to go back a third time.
Wow.
Not that he was, so enamored with war, But when he went over the first time, you're given you a choice of stateside assignment.
Mhm.
So he got it, and he loved what he was doing. Well, he was told that he had to report to Fort Polk, Louisiana. They called it Tigerland during that time. They would train you, in the swamps of Louisiana to go to Vietnam. And he said no, because he said during that time they would lynch the black soldiers right off the post. So you'd be driving on the post and see one of your guys hanging.
Absolutely.
So he said, no, I'll go back to Vietnam first.
Mm-mm.
I'm not going to die in my own country. I'll go back to Vietnam. See, when he
And
served
this
another
is what
tour,
I mean.
2 tours in Vietnam, came back, same deal, got his old job, Fort Jackson, South Carolina. And I think he was there for maybe 3 months. Told him, go see the captain. Captain says, sorry, you got to go to Tigerland. You got to go to Fort Polk. He said, no, Cap, I'll go back to Vietnam. He said, nope. You served 2 tours in Nam. You going to Fort Polk. He didn't want to get out of the Army. But when he got to Fort Polk, and we're talking, it's the late 60s, the legislation, Civil Rights and Voting Rights Act had been signed. But when did it take effect? In 1970, 71, was bused from one section of Brooklyn, from Bedford-Stuyvesant to a section of New York, Brooklyn, I'd never seen in my life. I'd be the only black face in the class. And that was the government's way of addressing the inequities in the educational system. Why not take that money and put it into the black neighborhoods,
Right.
equal amount of funding, right? And let's build our educational level up instead of taking the so-called smart kids, taking them out and sending them on the other side of town, right? That was their way of addressing it. Well, again, that's a form of separation, right? Because now you're separated from your community and from your people, and you're out living them, going to school amongst strangers that don't necessarily appreciate the fact that you're there. Elementary school was okay. Junior high school, and I'm sure that people listening who can attest to this, some of them my family members, we would come out of school and there would be a line of people waiting for us with bricks and bottles and dogs. And it wasn't just the kids, it was their parents.
Because kids learned it from somewhere.
Right. Now here we are walking to a train station, and the principal called the cops, but they wouldn't even get out of the car. They would just ride slowly. And the bottles and bricks would be coming over the police car, and we're ducking. They wouldn't even tell them to stop. Because in their mind, you don't belong here. Right. They're just doing what they need to do to protect their neighborhood. But protect it from whom? We just going to school. But we were school kids, but what did they see? And, for people across this country, and I'm talking black and brown people, when you encounter the police, and look, I was a police officer. When you encounter the police, what do they see? And so many of us do not want to police our own communities.
Now, this is where things get interesting with me.
Well, if you think about it, there was a young man in Colorado who wore a ski mask because he had some kind of metabolic condition, but he was always cold. That kid was walking home with just some groceries. And the Colorado police put him in chokehold, and then they called an ambulance and they gave him a tranquilizer that killed him. And what was he doing? He was wearing a mask.
That's really cool.
Because
Colorado is hot all the time. It's like 80 degrees in the morning time.
Well, it was summer, right? And it
don't even matter. Colorado is always hot. There's no snow ever.
Well,
there's no reason to wear a ski mask.
There are laws on the books saying that you cannot hide your face. But, if you talk to a person and they tell you, listen, I'm just cold.
Right.
It's the only reason I have it on. At that point, you could say, young man, get home safely.
Right.
Simple as that. But when you perceive a threat, automatically, right, then you become more aggressive in your handling of the situation.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something, Devin, that you need to be aware of.
I talk to them about this a lot.
Because for this country, this country has created its own boogeyman, and it looks a lot like youth.
Unfortunately.
Black youth. right? Now, I see a young man, right, who has, inspiration, who has aspirations of working behind the boards, right? You know, getting into radio, television, right, broadcasting.
Mm-hmm.
What do the police see?
A thug.
And all of this. And if you listen to urban radio, they will run down a litany of problems that Black people have in this country, but they will not even talk about separation. So if we have all of these problems, and if we have, and I just saw something today where I think he was an airman, served in the Air Force. The police went into the wrong apartment and killed him. This is just this week or last week.
It happens all the time.
Right. So why not have our own communities where we can feel safe while children are not preyed? Is that wrong?
No, we tried that back in the 60s. We called them the Black Panthers. And we tried to police our own neighborhoods.
Right.
We tried to educate the children. We started after school programs. But with the Black Panthers, what were they labeled?
Well, yeah, they were labeled terrorist organization.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
And you know something? I think it's important for people to know that the group was not the Black Panthers, should I say. The actual name was the Black Panthers for Self-Defense. It is important that we include that self-defense piece because there's a negative connotation when you say the word Black.
Yes.
Right? And you brought up the Black Panthers. Yes, the Black Panthers saw the need, and not just them. It was Marcus Garvey, right after the turn of the century, who said, look, we have nearly 20, 30 million people in this country who are being held captive in this country, who have economic power, right? And we should use the economic power for our benefit, not to benefit America that only wants to use and abuse us. We need to use that economic power to build something, not just here, but in our native Africa.
Right.
And we did not, well, you know what? We did not follow through on what he had proposed. Elijah Muhammad and the Nation of Islam, same proposal, right? Breaking away and let's start our own communities, our own businesses, provide jobs for Black youth so that men don't have to sit at home and watch their wives go to work. You now can have a job. You can be a contributor to your family. Be there for your wife. Be there for your children. But again, it all starts with the mental part of it, the recolonization of the African mind so we can think again like African and Afrocentric people. And, I also said, I wanted to touch on a little bit about the situation going on with Drake. Right. And
the shooting at his house.
Right.
Yeah.
And this other young man, Kendrick Lamar. So the other day, there's a shooting outside Drake's mansion, and one of his bodyguards is shot. And automatically, the media said or suggested, strongly suggested, Kendrick Lamar. There's no suspect. Drake was not home. This was a bodyguard. How do we know the bodyguard didn't have a beef with somebody?
Right.
And you know something? So he brought up the Black Panthers. A lot of people may not be aware of this, but in the 1960s, under the counterintelligence program, the FBI would send letters to one group and made it appear as if, say, the Black Panthers, would send letters to another group threatening them, right? To sow discord between the two groups so they would kill each other. So now you have Kendrick Lamar and you have Drake. They have some sort of, or allegedly, a little rap beef going on. But now, does that rise to the level of firing a shot?
Absolutely not. First of all, It's been since Biggie and Tupac
Mhm.
that rap beef has come off wax.
Mhm.
Literally, that has really come to blows on the street to the fact that people are actually firing bullets at each other. I highly doubt between the money that is being made, the actual intellect, the talent between Drake and Kendrick Lamar, that these men are firing at each other or sending anyone to fire at each other. Now, what I do believe is that there is either maybe the bodyguard had something going on with somebody, there's somebody pulling strings behind the scenes, there's something bigger going on that they're trying to distract us with, this little thing going here. But I highly doubt that this is what it appears to be.
Now you said somebody behind the scenes. That's interesting. After the Rodney King verdict, some months later there was I don't want to say the Watch Right. I want to say it was the Watch Uprising, right? Okay. During that time, the Bloods and the Crips formed a truce.
Yes, they did.
Who broke that truce?
I want to say, my opinion, the police.
Thank you. Because there were police officers who were members of the Bloods
And the Crips too.
that were associated with Suge Knight, right?
Mhm.
So it doesn't take much for me to put on a red bandana,
Right.
ride through a neighborhood and shoot somebody, and automatically people are going to focus on the bandana, not on my face,
Right.
just
Just the
the
color.
red bandana.
Because that's all that matters.
And that's what led to the breakdown of this truce. And before you know it, the black community was awash in blood again. Did you want to say something? Oh, okay. The community was awash in blood again. So a lot of times we think it's our rival group. It's not. It's people much higher up the food chain. Because if you look at the situation going on in Gaza, there is no profit in peace.
Absolutely.
There's so much more money to be made killing people. The real winners in this war is companies like BlackRock that own these defense contractors. They are making money hand over fist. Billions of dollars going to these companies to produce more weapons of mass destruction to send to Israel and to arm NATO. Billions of dollars. These same companies are hoping to get the contracts. What they're going to have they basically have the exclusive rights over Ukraine. So once the war is over, whenever that'll be, who's going to rebuild Ukraine? BlackRock. And all of these subsidiary companies are going to make trillions of dollars rebuilding a country that they themselves destroyed.
Yep.
That's the way, that's capitalism. That's capitalism in a nutshell. And in this country, a lot of these prisons are privately owned.
Oh, yeah.
No money if you do not have men and women warehoused.
Now, speaking of prisons,
Mm-hmm.
if you ask where they should find these people to put on the front lines, I say let's go get everybody on death row and everybody doing life.
But you know something? A lot of people on death row shouldn't even be there. There was a man that did 30 years on death row, and finally, through DNA, he got out of jail. He didn't unfortunately, he died a few years after being released from prison. But it was known from day one that he hadn't done anything wrong. In fact, in his book, he said, the detective looked at him and said, "Boy, I know you didn't do nothing wrong. It don't matter. One of you always doing something. So whether it's you or him, somebody going to jail."
Well, okay, in cases like that, maybe, we look a little deeper in death row, but to the people we know for sure did what they're accused of, Because I mean, death row. Look at he was on death row for 30 years. Death row. He should have just got life. That's
Right.
it. You know. But for these people who have life without the possibility of parole, these child molesters, these rapists,
Mhm.
put them on the front line.
I got another
They
suggestion.
deserve to be there.
I got another suggestion. Why don't we take some of the senators' children?
Yeah.
Why don't we take
See,
some
y'all
people?
so quick to get in other people's business. Then
Right.
let's put y'all children on the line
Why don't we?
on the list of the draft.
Why don't we take
and
some people
see-
whose last name is Trump
Who?
and let them go over there?
They're not doing that.
Exactly, but they'll send your children off to fight their
They'll
war.
send our kids so
Right.
fast.
Mhm.
But see, here's the thing: if their children were eligible, let me tell you something. America will be the most minding their business country there is. But no, they want to be all nosy and be all up in everybody else's business. Won't fix their own. Their yard look a whole terrible mess.
Mhm.
But they so busy mowing everybody else's lawn and pruning everybody else's bushes. But we just a mess.
Mhm. Right.
Because I think, what is it, statistically, they said what's like 40% of the homeless in the United States are United States veterans. That is disgusting.
Right.
That is disgusting.
Mhm. You know something?
Mind blowing.
Well, when you come back, you kind of get lost in the shuffle.
Of course.
You come
Because
back.
they don't care.
Well, now that's true.
They've gotten what they needed from you.
Exactly. But not just that. You got to figure, if you've been wounded, and some wounds you can't see externally.
And those are the worst ones.
Exactly. So if you've been wounded, and the government says in your DD 214, right, in your medical records, that you have a form of mental illness like PTSD. Well, are you going to let this kid drive the school bus? Are you going to put this person, will the police hire them? Because you give them a gun and they have a flashback, well, you might be in a precinct shooting the captain, right?
But you know what? At the end of the day, if we're going to go there, you don't have to be in the military to have PTSD, because being a police officer, and I'm sure you can understand exactly where I'm going with this,
Mhm.
you work anywhere from 12 to 16 hours a day, right? And you work what, 4 to 6 days a week?
I work 4 days a week.
Okay, 4 days a week.
Mhm.
For how many years?
For 20 years.
For 20 years. So for 4 days a week, for 20 years, you saw the lowest of humanity for what, 12 hours a day?
8, sometimes 12.
8, sometimes 12 hours a day. Back to 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 back. How many times did someone say to you, "Hey, Officer Yates, how's your mental health?"
That didn't happen.
Exactly.
Mhm.
So now, here's my problem. With all due respect, everybody, y'all about to get mad at me. And I'm okay with that. Do Black Lives Matter? Absolutely. I stand for it. I lay down for it. I die for it. Why? I have Black sons. I have Black men that I love. And I'm going to ride with it all day, every day. But do Blue Lives Matter? Absolutely. You know why? Because they see the worst of the worst all day long. And they know nobody's checking for their mental health. Nobody is saying, "Are you okay?" There's no way you can tell me that you can be traumatized as a child and you're 39 years old sitting on somebody's couch still crying about it, but you can't tell me that you can't understand how an officer can have a jaded view of the world and life and people when they see nothing but terrible, disgusting rapes, murders, car accidents, death, children abused, women abused, people's heads shot off, drug deals, all this every single day, voluntarily for 20 years, 8 to 12 hours a day, 4 days a week, and nobody ever says, "Are you okay?" Nobody ever checks for them. Nobody says, "You know what?
it's been 3 months since you shot that guy, or it's been 3 months since you saw that lady jump off that building, or it's been 3 months since you saw that man kill his 3 kids and his wife. Are you okay? You need to see a psychiatrist. You might need medication. You might need a vacation. You need something.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody can be okay after that. So guess what? All lives matter. Because when you are dealing with that voluntarily every single day for 20 years, I'm not saying it's okay to run around killing people, but I'm saying if you think of it from a human aspect, not a black aspect, not a white aspect, not a racial aspect, but from humanity, from one heart to another. If you can't understand how seeing that all day, every day can change your mind about how you see the world and the people in it, and how certain things can trigger you to feel a certain way to where you'll react a certain way to certain things, I'm not saying it's right. I'm just saying it is what it is.
So I just want to add on to that a little something. The police that come to the neighborhoods and they do the jobs, the difference between them and the people that's actually living in the neighborhood, they go home. You see that trauma that they talk about, that they see, and that. If you live there, you see this every day.
Mm-hmm.
And you're not a police officer, so you want to talk about the person that's traumatized. See, the people that live in the neighborhoods, they're mostly the victims. That little 5% that does a little crazy stuff, that's the 5%. That's for them to deal with. Well, and personally,
5%.
yeah. When you go to see, that's the thing. When you go to most neighborhoods, like especially people that don't come from that neighborhood, and they look at a person like you or I, they think all of us are like that. They think we're all monolithic, and we're not. Not at all. I grew up in Farragut housing, okay, and I lived in Brownsville, Brooklyn. And the majority of the people that I knew were very good people. But you ask somebody from the 75th precinct how Farragut was.
Oh,
They used to call it shotgun territory. So when the police come by and they see me, it's already. So I 12 years old, I got to see a guy thrown off a roof, 13th floor, fell in front of me, boom, traumatized. I'm just saying, I understand that they're traumatized. But the difference between them and us, they get to go home. Another difference to them is they have a social structure that's already set up, that if they need help, they can get it. The thing about mental health, especially when it comes to PTSD, you don't even know a person has it. Sometimes you don't know that you have it.
Right.
So a lot of things with mental health is not something like you can walk up and say, this guy's got mental health, and it doesn't work that way.
But that's why I said nobody's checking for them. And the reason I say nobody's checking for them is because now I get what you're saying. Right. I was
not disputing with you, just adding on.
No, I grew up in Far Rockaway, Queens. Trust me, I know all about it. Like literally, if you came to my hood and you didn't know somebody whose name rung bells, you were not leaving the same way you came. Same thing in Brooklyn, same thing with Farragut. We already know. If your name didn't ring bells or you didn't know somebody who did, you had a problem.
Well, as a police officer, one of the things that they're gonna have, they got training, and I know you said that they don't have
proper training.
I know you said they don't have people that come and check on them, but they actually do. And a lot of times they have what they call open door policies.
That open door policy is BS, because if they walk into a superior's office and say, you know what, I am not okay, then you know what's on the line? Their jobs, their pensions, their retirements, their families, everything.
And if they're let back out on the street, if they don't do that and they're let back out on the street,
it's just as dangerous.
But you know what? Now my life is at risk. Right. Everybody that they deal with is at risk. I'm sorry he may lose his pension, but I don't want to lose my life.
And I'm not arguing with you.
You're not necessarily going to lose your pension. Typically what happens is, if you have, say, a call, high stress call, and you want to talk to somebody, they will refer you to someone, right? But the problem is most guys don't want that referral. And typically, when you go in and you have a mental health crisis, no matter how minor or how major, we think the first thing they do, they take your gun. They take your gun, which means you can't work. Now you're going to get paid, but you have to understand, policing is this macho mentality, right? I can take it, I can deal with it. So you find certain occupations highest rate of alcoholism,
Mhm.
right? Cops, firemen are known to be alcoholics.
Alcoholics, wife beaters.
There you go.
Of course, yeah.
How do you deal with this stress? You don't want to talk to somebody because you're worried about them taking your gun and saying, well, you're not fit to be on the street anymore.
Right.
So, you kind of keep it
It's
in.
a double-edged sword. It's a double-edged sword because you either internalize it and it literally eats you alive, or you let it out and you run the risk of losing everything you have. But you're put in a position of, well, it's gonna be them or me, and everybody on the planet chooses them. When it comes down to them or me, it always comes down to it's going to be them. And unfortunately, when it comes to cops, 99% of them is young black men.
Yeah.
That's the problem. That is the problem.
And when you talk about training, right? There's a great deal of training that you have to undergo to come out on the street. Training is not the problem, and training will never fix the situations or the conditions. The problem is when you have preconceived notions when you enter the academy, you have them when you leave the academy, and you have them when you come out on the street. Prejudice is something that you can't train it away.
Right.
That's something that, you have to deal with at home, right? Because once you have it, right, it's going to be exhibited.
Yeah, it shows. It shows. And unfortunately, the sad part is that you see a lot of people who don't even realize that they are prejudiced. They don't. And that in itself is sad, because that just goes to show how deeply rooted it is in them, because it's been taught from so young that they don't even know that there's something wrong with that way of thinking or that thought process. And then when you explain it to them, they're just like so shocked, like, wait a minute, what?
Well, it's reinforced in the school district or in schools. It's reinforced historically because history, you win the war, you write the stories, right? So much that has happened didn't necessarily happen the way it's written down in the books.
Right.
But because the people with the bigger guns are telling the story, after a while, it becomes reality. Like you were talking about Columbus. They taught us in school that this man discovered this country. The fact of the matter is Columbus never set foot on any part. We have a call coming in. Hello, caller.
Mr. Yates, this is DJ Rudd.
Hey, Rudd, how you doing, brother?
Hey, man, I'm listening to this conversation. It's amazing, and I think it's very necessary. And it started taking me back to a dark place, because I would say you got to throw like correction officers and other type of occupations like that in the same toolbox.
Absolutely.
It's the same kind of thing, and especially with the training. You know what I mean? Like, some people might have been lucky enough to maybe like have supervision experience prior to coming there or something, but a lot of people don't. They're young. They're 21. They're walking in. They turn them loose into a housing area, and they in charge of supervising, 50 inmates pretty much, and with no real supervision experience, and they just figuring it out. And a lot of the same thing. They turning these guys out in the street, and without the proper training, a lot of the time they're just figuring it out. Especially during that initial probation period, you're just figuring it out, and that's very dangerous, man. And it just made me think of it. And you're still traumatized from it, even though you might have retired years ago. It still affects the way you look at the world today. So I just wanted to add that on, man. And you guys, you're doing an amazing job, and I'll see you guys soon, man. Thanks.
Well, thanks for
Thank you.
calling, brother. We really appreciate that.
All right, copy. Later.
All right, bye.
Right.
So anyway, you know what? We're going to have to end this session. You know, we unfortunately got a late start today, but we are going to be back here next Thursday, and you know, we need your input. You know what I mean? We want to hear from you. We want you to give us your energy, your opinion, and let us know what you think, because these issues are very, very important for us and for our survival as people in this country. So with that, I'm going to say good night, and I'll see you next Thursday.
Good night, everybody.